Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you for your leadership on this issue. Beginning right after the shooting last year, coming down, attending funerals. Thank you. I know this means a tremendous amount to you. And before I begin my comments, I want to say thank you to Senator Diaz for your incredibly hard work on this bill and your dedication to making sure that we get it right. For listening to me every time I brought a note over to your office or came with a concern. I really do hope that we'll be able to work together on meaningful legislation together in the future. Cassie Bernal, Steve Kernell, Corey DePuter, Kelly Fleming, Matt Kechter, Daniel Mauser, Daniel Rarbaugh, Rachel Scott, Isaiah Scholes, John Tomlin, Lauren Townsend, Kyle Velasquez, Coach Dave Sanders. And just as I began my debate in the Appropriations Committee by naming the 14 students and 3 faculty members who lost their lives in the attack at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School last year, I wanted to begin my debate today by reading the names of the 12 students and 1 faculty member who were killed at Columbine High School on April 20th, 1999, which experts will tell you began the trend of targeted attacks in American schools perpetrated by students. This past Saturday marked 20 years since Columbine. And today we find ourselves in the middle of a national political debate about school safety, divided largely down party lines. I read these names to remind each and every one of us that today is about rising above politics, to create good policy, to put reason above the rhetoric. It's about the children in our schools who just want to feel safe in their classroom. Students like MSD freshman Luke Hoyer, whose favorite food was chicken nuggets, who loved Dwayne Wade and had a real sweet tooth. Or like Carmen Shentrip, whose mom was a principal in Broward County and who wanted to be a medical researcher, not a doctor, because she couldn't stand the sight of blood. Or like Peter Wang, a sweet, funny, caring, and brave boy who held the door on the 3rd floor for his friends to escape. He was an excellent marksman in the JROTC. Like Gina Montalto, a gifted dancer who would have celebrated her 16th birthday yesterday. And like Chris Hickson, a Navy war veteran who survived in the Persian Gulf during Desert Storm and Desert Shield, only to come home and be shot in the hallway of the school that he loved. Before I go any further, I want to take a step back and state the clear and rational truth that everyone in this chamber cares deeply about the safety of the students and staff in Florida's 67 county school districts, that none of us want to put anyone in harm's way, especially school children, and that we clearly disagree sometimes on the best pathway forward. But members, that's why this process exists, for lawmakers to discuss, debate, and work to arrive at the best possible place for the citizens that we're elected to represent. It's now been 423 days, 22 hours, and 47 seconds since the first shots were fired at 2:21:33 p.m. on February 14th, 2018. From the moment I received the news that there was an active shooter at Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School, I began to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, never imagining that the worst could end up being as bad as it actually was. A war zone in a high school, a mass casualty situation, The facts now fall from my mouth as easily as the names of our 17 fallen eagles. There have been 46 targeted attacks on K-12 schools in the past 20 years. Most end in less than 4 minutes. The MSD attack was no different. All 34 victims had been shot within 3 minutes and 42 seconds of the first shot ringing out at 2:21. By the time former Deputy Peterson arrived outside Building 12 at 2:24, 24 people had been shot on the first floor of that building. It only took 98 seconds to shoot 24 people. That's over half of the members in this chamber. 11 of the 24 died within seconds. That's 1/3 of us. The body count only goes up from there. Throughout the massacre, the assailant reloaded, as Senator Hooper pointed out, 5 times, providing multiple opportunities for intervention. We will unfortunately never know what might have happened had former Deputy Peterson confronted the shooter because he chose to do nothing. In fact, he did not move for 48 minutes. Not seconds, 48 minutes. We'll never know what might have happened had former security monitor Medina raised an alarm after seeing the shooter enter campus through an unmanned gate, knowing that he was banned from doing so while carrying a rifle bag, no less. However, we do know that the first verifiable code red was not called by the school until 2:24:55, as the shooter was laying the last of many shots into an already deceased Peter Wang. I will remind you that the attack lasted 3 minutes and 42 seconds from first to last shot. The first law enforcement officers did not enter Building 12 until 11 minutes and 4 seconds after the first shot was fired. Keep in mind, it only takes 20 seconds to several minutes to bleed to death. So the body count was very high. And as we know, by the time of entry, the officers were far too late to provide any help. The shooter was long gone, having fled with fellow students, a wolf running among sheep, with not a shepherd in sight. 14 students and 3 educators died from their injuries that day, and 2 more student deaths just in the past few weeks have occurred as a result of this traumatic and unthinkable attack. I could go on and explain more about the movements of the shooter, the response of the district, or shall I say, the lack thereof. Issues with radio towers, which will be corrected by Senator Brandish's very good bill, SB 536. I could explain what went right, what went wrong, and where and when and how, because I made it my business to know. I was there walking the scene with members of this chamber and House leadership the afternoon of February 15th, peering into classrooms, now crime scenes, from the outside of the building, horrified by the trails of blood where they dragged Coach Hickson out of the hallway and where Coach Feist was shot and killed. On February 16th, instead of attending my baby's first birthday, I was standing in Kyle LeMann's hospital room in the children's unit of Broward General with trauma doctors who were incredulous that Kyle had escaped down 3 flights of stairs with a gaping hole in his foot, left by an AR-15 rifle. As the clock struck 10:30 on February 17th, the exact moment that my kids turned a year old, Alyssa Alhadeff was being buried. She was 14 when she was killed, shot in Miss Haas's English class, right next to Alex Schachter and Elena Petty. May they rest in peace. By that Saturday, February 17th, I was already working with MSD, then junior class president, now senior class president, Jackie Corin, to bring 100 student survivors on an overnight advocacy trip to the Florida Capitol less than a week after the shooting. We didn't coach the students on what to say, only how to say it, to speak with decorum and respect. To those of you who were here last year, thank you for welcoming these students in for meetings with open hearts, open minds. It wasn't easy for any one of us. And for those of you who did, thank you for supporting our comprehensive school safety package. So proud I was to be part of the body that passed this bipartisan bill, which contained unprecedented funding for school safety and mental health, and the most substantive changes to Florida gun control laws in more than 2 decades. I maintain that it may have been far from perfect, but it was a win, and not a symbolic win, but one of real, true sum and substance. Since that time, the debate on school safety has raged on. Some of you have continued to follow along and engage, and some have not. But as a member of the Marjory Stoneman Douglas Public Safety Commission, I want to share with you some of the work that we've been doing. Our commission was tasked with studying the massacre at MSD and making recommendations on how to prevent targeted attacks like this from ever happening again in our K-12 system. I want to thank the members of the commission, the FDLE staff, and the Pinellas County Sheriff's Office for digging in, for all of their hard work. There is not a day that goes by that I don't shoot them an email or ask them a question about how many seconds something took, how many minutes something took. Why did things happen the way that they did? They answer every single time. They go above and beyond. Their hard work and dedication is beyond measure. They are true public servants. My fellow commissioners and I have now participated in hundreds of hours of opened and closed-door sessions, engaging in multidisciplinary expert testimony, asking tough questions, and receiving some very, very complex answers. Spending countless days and nights reading studies, recommendations, facts, and findings. Studying evidence and watching unredacted footage over and over and over again. Second by second, minute by minute, bullet by bullet, and body by body. You cannot unsee the things that we have seen, nor can you unhear what we have heard. The facts, the figures, and images continue to haunt me, but the work is more than worth it. The details that have emerged are shocking, maddening, and truly disgusting. We're uncovering not only preventable errors and the need for policy change, some of which is contained within this bill, but also best practices and new models for responses. Because sadly, we know that it's not a matter of if, but when this happens again in another community somewhere else in America. Members, you can only imagine the testimony from the families of the fallen, recalling how painfully long it took to find out what happened to their children or to their spouses. The 911 calls, some with screams, others with very quiet but desperate whispers, and a barrage of bullets in the background fired from a literal weapon of war. I wish that all of us could review this before voting today, because I believe every single one of us has a responsibility to know and to understand exactly what happened on February 14th inside MSD, how it came to occur, and the failures in response. It's no secret that I am deeply personally conflicted about some of the substance of this bill, not because it would create a behavioral threat assessment tool and a database to ensure students do not fall through the cracks. Students like the MSD shooter or Sol Pais, the disturbed, armed, and dangerous Miami-Dade student who only a week ago made headlines for her devotion to the Columbine shooters, where it defies logic that she had no documented issues within the district. not because of this bill's requirement for school boards to adopt developmentally appropriate and age-appropriate active assailant response plans, annual training for school personnel, and a district-level school safety officer position, not because of measures that will in the future hold a school superintendent responsible by withholding his or her salary if they fail to comply with school safety standards. Because I will remind you, it took over a year from the time of the massacre for Broward County schools to develop an active assailant policy. Not because of increased reporting requirements of assessor data, so that parents and the community have a real and accurate picture of what's happening inside of our schools. I'll also remind you that a murder occurred on a Florida high school campus that was never reported to the Department of Education. That a single elementary school in Gainesville reported 72 physical attacks of students last year, while Miami-Dade County reported none. Throughout the entire district, a sheer impossibility. Or in Broward County, after the massacre, when you would think the district and the school would be hyper-vigilant about reporting this type of data, but instead, no incidences were reported, no incidences of trespassing. For example, when we are reading in the local papers that the shooter's brother had been on the MSD campus when he should not have been. As it stands in my community today, we're better off reading the Pulitzer Prize-winning Sun-Sentinel and watching YouTube, as Commissioner Schachter pointed out, to learn about what's happening in our schools, than looking to the district for answers. I stand here conflicted not over these critical and extraordinary important pieces of Senate Bill 7030, but over the provision to expand the Coach Aaron Feist guardianship program to classroom-based personnel. After having dedicated a piece of my heart and soul to serving on the commission, I voted to include the Guardian program in our recommendations for our chambers to consider, not to blindly advance it, but to consider it. Because as I watched the footage of the massacre, I saw Coach Hickson launch into action to try to protect his kids. And having been in a classroom, I can tell you, they are your kids. I saw him look around, check his pockets, search desperately for something, anything, to engage the shooter. And after seeing all of the footage, I know that he could have and would have done more to stop or delay the carnage if he were a guardian. It's because of that knowledge, coupled with the deep understanding of the kind of person who perpetrates these types of targeted attacks. While there is no profile, knowing that there is a clear pathway to violence with planning, weapon acquisition, and leakage, I do believe we need to entertain this thought, to debate it. Because as one teacher had planned to do, saying "I love you" to the shooter as he entered, as she believed he would enter, will not stop bullets. Our commission unanimously voted to include the Guardian program for consideration in our final report to the legislature because we know that of the 46 targeted attacks in K-12 schools that have occurred since Columbine, school personnel have most frequently and successfully stopped the attacks, not law enforcement. And because we know that within the first 3 minutes and 43 seconds the shooter was in Building 12, all 34 victims had been shot and 17 were dead. I watched the footage. I know that seconds count. And so I voted for it to be discussed by this body as well as with our counterparts in the House. So after all that's said and done, here's where I'm left standing. I know that our schools are understaffed, our teachers are underpaid, and that they did not enter their profession to brandish firearms. I know that the Guardian program is optional, but I also know that rural counties were voting on arming school personnel out of necessity far before the legislature even got involved. I know I've heard from students, teachers, families from across the state who do not want more guns in schools. And I know that it is my job to listen to them. That's what I've been sent here to do, to lead and to serve. But I know that outside of this role, I'm a mom who recently began dropping my own kids off at school. I always figured that I'd tear up because of how sweet and cute they were with their cute little matching backpacks. I never imagined tears streaming down my face because I'm afraid of what could happen to them while they're at school. Or that I, along with L'Oreal Hadef, would order hundreds of dollars of bulletproof backpacks to see how they worked. Or in her case, so her other children could protect themselves the next time, she explained to me. Because once a shooter comes along, they're on their own. I know that as a parent, I should be worried about how my children are doing on their math and spelling tests, and if their classmates are being nice to them on the playground. I was always worried that I wouldn't be there for the skinned knees, not being able to kiss it and make it better. I never imagined having to worry that their biggest boo-boo might be a bullet wound, or that they'll bleed to death on the floor of their classroom. Parents should not be sending their children to school not knowing whether they're going to come home. But they are. We are. And so we ask, how can we best protect our children? How do I think my own children will be best protected? As I was going over my notes this morning, I received a news alert on my phone stating that there was a lockdown at a West Hollywood elementary school. I froze. Thankfully, we've since heard word that everything was okay. To know that all is well is not always the case. I was going to read the names of the 20 children and 6 faculty who died at Sandy Hook Elementary on December 14th, 2012. But I couldn't bring myself to compile the list of names of these littlest victims. 16 were 6 years old. 4 were 7. They're more than just names on a list that shouldn't exist, but we are here today so that no one has to read a list of children's name in memoriam this long, ever again. I've listened to the debate, the questions, and the public testimony on this bill from its first committee stop, and the one thing that remains crystal clear is that far more must be done. I have done nothing but eat, sleep, and drink this terrible massacre, and the policy issues that we've learned must be addressed. And I have mourned with my community in the days, weeks, and months after the attack, the families of the deceased and the injured and those who survived. Our community is still coming to terms with this new normal, and we're still struggling. For example, this past December, when we went to the Nutcracker, I wondered if Jamie Gutenberg would have danced. She was so good. And on Dwayne Wade's final night with the Miami Heat, I held Luke Hoyer and Joaquin Oliver in my heart, knowing that they would have been watching their favorite player's last game. Earlier this month, when we lost 2 more bright lights in our community, 19-year-old Cindy Aleo and 16-year-old Calvin Desir took their lives after surviving toxic trauma and a lack of services in the wake of last year's attack. A year ago, we worked so hard in such a short period of time to pass a meaningful response to the crisis. It wasn't enough, and we're here to move the needle to keep making sure our kids are safe. Last year, I stood in front of you encouraging my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to move forward a good piece of legislation because I believed in its core components And in the end, because my community demanded it, these families have a voice in Tallahassee, but they don't have a vote. I am their vote. And so I have said that there is so much good in this bill. Enhanced reporting data requirements around Cessor, the creation of a behavioral threat assessment database, accountability measures to ensure safety compliance. I must, at the urging of my community, vote no today. But it's an exceedingly painful vote, because I know Luke Hoyer, Martin Duquette, Gina Montalto, Alex Schachter, Alyssa Alhadeff, Elena Petty, Helena Ramsey, Carmen Shentrep, Nicholas Dorette, Chris Hickson, Aaron Feiss, Scott Beagle, Joaquin Oliver, Meadow Pollock, Carol Loughran, Jamie Gutenberg, and Peter Wang don't and won't have a voice ever again. Thank you, Mr. President.